it's going to be an impact with any significant change. Oh, I see, brothers.
Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. A few weeks ago, I announced a crowdsourced effort to try and work out the drop rate of the divination card I See Brothers. And of course, spoilers on the screen at the moment, but what I wanted to do is go through exactly how much we can say about the real drop rate of this card. So this divination card drops only from map bosses, and it's very, very rare. We knew going into this that it was going to be a very rare card. I wasn't sure going in whether we would see closer to 10 or closer to 50 of the card, and as it turns out, we ended up seeing exactly 27. Now it's important to note that map boss divination card drops are very hard to juice. If a card only drops from a map boss, it's not affected by divination scarabs, it's not affected by increased item quantity as a player stat, nor is it affected by increased item quantity as a map stat. All that matters is the number of map bosses that you kill, so the twinned affix on the map does help, but other than that there's basically nothing you can do. Now this divination card drops from map bosses where there are exactly 2 map bosses by default on that map, so 2 without the twinned affix, 4 if you do have the twinned affix, and also neither of the map bosses is obviously female. For example, Promenade doesn't count because the Archmage that's one of the 2 bosses there is definitely female. Likewise, Cold River doesn't count because Solaris and Lunaris are female, but in the Canyon map, where the gender identity of the bosses isn't really clear, that does count and they are both considered brothers for the purposes of this card. Also, it's worth noting that the Atoll map and the Plateau map are a bit bugged, and the wrong Peruna the Challenger gets this card. So this card can drop in Atoll map, and it should not be able to. It cannot drop from Peruna the Challenger in a Plateau map, and it probably should be able to. All that about what the card is, let's talk about how we tested it. It's easy to accidentally bias results because there is a bias towards results that you are more excited about or that you feel are more remarkable are the ones you tend to talk about more. Let's say, for instance, you flip a coin 10 times. If it comes up 9 heads, 1 tails, you're going to think, gee, that was pretty remarkable, and you're going to be inclined to talk about it. Whereas if you flip it and you get 6 heads and 4 tails, or maybe you get 5 and 5, you're going to think, oh, that was a pretty mundane result, and you're less likely to talk about it. The gold standard in science is adding a control group and running a double-blinded experiment, but that was just beyond the capacities of something that was intended to be just a little bit of fun, so we didn't quite meet up to that gold standard. But the main type of bias that we worked to eliminate was a situation where you'd have 2 groups of people that start out the project equally motivated. Each of them says, I'm going to do 100 maps. The first one gets I See Brothers on their 31st map, and that invigorates them and excites them and inspires them to complete the project, and then they end up reporting, I ran 100 maps, I got 1 copy of the card. The second player gets 60 maps in, hasn't got the card, ends up feeling a bit bored, and not only do they not finish off their maps, but they don't end up reporting the results either. That's where the source of bias can come in, from people stopping early. And in order to prevent that, what we got people to do was reserve a block of 144 maps. You'd handball these on to other people if you wanted, take a screenshot showing how many of them were twinned and how many of them weren't twinned, and then go and run them and come back and report the results. Out of 144 blocks of maps, 143 of them reported, so we have very minimal effect of stopping bias here. Our provisional results: 20,592 maps cleared, 54,128 map bosses slain, 27 copies of the I See Brothers card dropped from their intended location. We also had 1 other I See Brothers card drop that was not from the intended location, and we suspect that this came from a rare monster that was spawned by Beyond, and that rare monster died and gave a shower of divination cards, one of which was I See Brothers. We're not counting that one as one of the cards that dropped, so we got 27 cards that came from their intended locations, plus that 28th one that's not going to end up in the results. So how accurately can we pin down the drop rate with this? The short version is actually not as accurately as you might think. 20,000 maps and 54,000 bosses may seem like a huge sample size, but actually because we only had 27 hits, it ends up being a pretty small sample size in practice. People better at statistics than me have come up with several methods for estimating probabilities when you've got this sort of empirical data, and the 95% Wilson confidence interval is a good one to use here. The website Stats Kingdom has an online confidence interval calculator that's really useful here, and I've put up the results here, but I'll summarize them in a sec. It's worth mentioning that the website also mentions a Clopper-Pearson exact interval, and that is actually not as accurate as Wilson's score interval. The word exact there is actually part of a name. It's not something that is a plain English description of how precise something is. And there's also some research I'll put a link to down in the description below if you want to see why it is that statisticians generally think the Wilson confidence interval is the best one to use. The answer is that unless our experiment as a whole, our entire set of more than 20,000 maps, had top 1 in 40 luck or bottom 1 in 40 luck, the real drop rate is somewhere between 1 in 1,378 map bosses and 1 in 2,916 map bosses. To get bounds that are much tighter than this, you'd need to roughly quadruple the size of the sample, and once you do that, you'll approximately halve the error margins. If you quadrupled it again, you'll halve it again. And so basically, if you wanted to get more information on how rare this card is than we've done here, you're looking at doing 100,000 maps, or 200,000 maps, or 400,000 maps, and that starts becoming a level of effort that's probably not plausible, except for things that are almost instantaneous to do, like opening stacked decks. Some notable drops that people had during the experiment. I personally had an IC Brothers card drop. It was on my 41st map, so I was quite lucky there. The person who commissioned IC Brothers divination card, they actually got one to drop themselves, which was really good to see. One person had a Mirror of Kalandra drop, and someone else had a Mirror Shard because they were adding a lot of Harbingers onto their maps. There was that IC Brothers that dropped from the Beyond Rare monster. And in terms of just making a lot of currency, I had a stash tab full of Deception contracts drop, about a stash tab full of blueprints drop, and of those blueprints, 12 of them were fully unveiled. And it's interesting to note that these heist materials sold for way, way, way more than my IC Brothers card did. Anyways, that experiment was a lot of fun to run. The next one is going to be relating to something that's going to be a bit easier to pin down, and that is some of the heist rewards that seem to have been overhauled a bit in this patch, specifically what used to be Metamorph rewards and are now Ultimatum rewards. There'll be a bit more on this later, but I'm going to run an experiment where we run 5,000 contracts, all of them level 83 and all of them demolition contracts, in order to get a sense as to just how rare some of the drops are of catalysts there, because it's certainly been my experience that I've had some pretty monstrous drops that I wasn't really expecting there, like getting 4 prismatic catalysts from one chest, things along those sorts of lines. It may turn out that this is a better farming strategy than people give it credit for, and if it's not, at least we'll have some fun finding that out. So that's coming soon. Something like this is not a one-person effort. I certainly did not run 20,000 plus maps myself. I want to thank people who helped a particularly large amount in the making of this video. So some of the names that topped the leaderboard for the number of maps that were run: Krolya, Henby, Herpesturpa, Philip, Cash Up To, Hal, and DocB7344. Thank you for doing over 400 maps towards this project each. That definitely adds up. Thanks to the 100 people who did smaller numbers of maps. And particular thanks to Clamsoapman, who has made a Discord bot for the next one of these. And also to Nerdy Joe for pointing out a number of mistakes I've made in the past in statistics that have been able to be fixed up, hopefully, for this video. But until then, may your Valobs have interesting results, and may the odds come up in your favour on the roughly 1 in 2,000 chance for any applicable map boss to drop the IC Brothers divination card for you.